My name is Francis, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you how to be selfless. How do you actually live your life from a selfless space? Because if you're living your life from a selfless space, technically that implies that you don't even have a self in that moment, because it's literally selfless, meaning that you don't have a self. And that would be the opposite of being a selfish person, because if you're selfish, you're thinking about yourself. If you're selfish, you're only worried about your survival and whatever it is that you want to create. But if you're selfless, if you're taking a selfless act, that means that you're doing something beyond yourself. You're taking action from a place of something bigger than you, and really you're doing it for the greater good of humanity. Something that is bigger than your little ego and your petty little survival. And when it comes to living your life from a selfless space, what does this actually mean for your life? Because if you start to align yourself from a selfless space, your entire reality will completely shift, and the person that you become in that process will be completely different. And technically, you wouldn't even be a person. Because if you're selfless, it means that you're not living as the person, but you're living as something that is greater than a concept of a person, a concept of the self. Because if you're running your life based on the concept of the self, you're always going to be limited, because that concept of the self is not actually selfless, because there's some self left in that concept of who you think you are. And if you're running your life based on that concept and you don't align yourself from a selfless space, you will always be limited to create the life that you want. Because to live your life from a selfless space, counterintuitively, would actually give you more in life. Because most people, they're unconsciously running off their ego. They're unconsciously running off the survival programming that we have been conditioned with. And this survival programming believes unconsciously that to be selfish, it would actually serve itself more. But the reality is that if you align yourself with truth, if you align yourself with being selfless, then you will actually benefit yourself technically even more, because you're connected with everything. There's no separation between you and other at a deeper level. So the more selfless that you become, the more that you actually serve your own being, because we're all connected as one thing. There really is no separation. And so the ego believes that living in survival is going to benefit itself. And technically it is, because that's the programming that we've been conditioned with. But that's a prehistoric programming that doesn't serve us when it comes to this evolution on this planet right now, because we're going through an evolution. There's an evolution of consciousness happening, and the ego and the selfish part of you is not going to cut it anymore. It's just not going to work, because life right now is about service and helping others. And to be selfless and to have selfless acts and to be somebody that has selfless service to humanity means that you have to let go of who you think you are. And that really is the only way that you're going to tap into the true potential in your life and create the life that you want, manifest the life that you want, use the law of attraction, create the vision that you want, step into the identity that you actually prefer to be in. Because if you're attached to your little self, the limited construct of who you think you are, then your results are always going to be limited in life. So to be selfless means to let go of the concept of who you think you are, to step into the unknown, to step into a part of you that technically isn't even a self anymore. It's just pure consciousness and pure awareness, and it's who you are, and that essence that comes before any concept of who you think you are. And to align from this space of consciousness, to align yourself from this space of presence and awareness and consciousness, the part of you that comes before a thought of you telling yourself who you think you are, the I before the I am. That is the selfless part of who you are. If you align yourself from this space and you live your life from this space, which is not going to have any fear, It's going to be aligned with its life purpose. And to be selfless means to align yourself with what you're truly supposed to be doing. It means to align yourself with your heart. It means to align yourself with a win-win scenario that is going to help you and help others. Because when you're running on your ego, it's a lose-lose for you and others. It's just a complete lose-lose. You lose, everybody else loses, because that's what the ego does. The ego is the survival programming. It's the part of you that is selfish. It's the part of you that only cares about itself and not other, not realizing that the self and the other are ultimately one, and there really is no separation. But in order to enter this life, in order to enter this planet and this earth, there had to be separation. But now it's about connecting with the oneness of all things that already are one. You just have to become conscious of that, and you have to align yourself with that. So to be selfless means to live your life and align yourself with truth, with a capital T. Align yourself with consciousness. Align yourself with the awareness that comes before all form. And this is something that is very practical and very tangible. And it's not just something that is an interesting idea, like, oh wow, that's an interesting concept to live your life from a selfless space. Well, it goes a lot deeper than just a concept, because to live your life from a selfless space would actually mean to let go of concepts, to let go of the concept of who you think you are, not to be attached to any belief system or any ideology. To be a selfless person would mean that you are not even technically a person in that state. And when you're not a person, you're just there as the unconditional love, as the awareness. You have the ability to give unconditional love and service to anybody in your presence, because you are not in alignment with the unconscious part of you, with the ego, with the devil. That's what that word really means. It just means an unconscious part of you. That's what evil actually is. Evil and selfishness and ego, evil, unconsciousness, selfishness, it's all the same thing. It all connects to the same thing. On the contrary, consciousness, love, light, awareness, who you really are, is in alignment with the selfless part of you. And that part of you is going to help you and humanity, not you as a person, but you as the conscious being that helps itself just as much as it helps others simultaneously as one being, because we're all connected. And the more that you tap into this part of yourself and you live as the true awareness, that is where true manifestation comes from. That is where you can tap into any identity that you prefer. You can choose to play any role that you want, because from that selfless space, you can be any self that you want. You can be any self that you want, because the selfless and the formless part of who you are really is the thing that comes before all things, all forms. Any self-concept of who you are, the selfless part of you comes before that. And so when you align yourself with the selfless part of who you are, you can start to shape yourself into who you want to be. Because yourself is ultimately the conditioned part of you. But when you can transcend that conditioning and realize who you are beyond the self, then what's going to happen is you can start to mold and shape that self in any way that you want. So obviously it's better to be a confident person than to be a shy person. Obviously it's better to be a charismatic person than somebody that can't talk to people. Obviously it's better to have lots of money than not to have lots of money. Obviously it's better to shape a better version of yourself. Obviously it's better to shape and change who you are. And I'm not saying that you can't change yourself on that identity surface level, but at a deeper level, the selfless part of who you are is what will allow that change to happen in a very powerful way. Because when you tap into the selfless part of who you are, that will be conducive to changing yourself any way that you want. In other words, when you realize who you are as just consciousness, when you realize who you are as space consciousness, as Eckhart Tolle calls it, the spaciousness that comes before all things, the space between you and thought, the space between you and emotion, the space between you and any sense perception and feeling. When you connect to that deeper state of consciousness and you realize that there's a formless part of who you are, it's the awareness happening in the background of all things, the awareness happening in the background of all form, all sounds. There's the sound, there's also the awareness happening in the background. There's a thought, there's also the awareness of that thought. There's an emotion, there's also the awareness of that emotion. And that awareness is the selfless part of who you are. If you align yourself with that awareness, with God, with who you actually are at a deeper level, then you can change yourself to be who you want into literally anybody that you prefer to be. You can turn into a confident person. You can turn into somebody that has a lot of money. You can turn into this. You can manifest your dream home. You can use law of attraction for whatever it is that you want, but you're not going to have resistance. That's why when you tap into God, when you tap into who you are, when I say God, I'm not religious. I'm talking about the awareness and the consciousness that comes before all form. When you tap into that selfless part of who you are, you can start to shift and start to use, you can get the real power out of affirmations, out of prayer, which is supposed to be done in the present tense. You pray not hoping, but you pray as an affirmation in the present tense because you know that energy already exists now in that field of consciousness. Because in that selfless consciousness that exists now, in this present moment at all times, exists any version of you that you want to be. Exists any parallel reality of you, and you just have to align yourself with that parallel reality. But it's much easier to do that when you are in alignment with God, when you are in alignment with truth, when you are living from the selfless part of who you are. Because when you are not a self, you can choose to be any self that you want. When you are not attached to a self, a concept, and the false sense of self that you have developed from the conditioning of society, you can then choose to be any self that you prefer. And when you detach from that false self and you are connected to the true self, the formless and the selfless part of who you are, once again, you can shape yourself into who you want to be. You can shape the surface level identity, not the deeper level identity as space consciousness, but you can shape the surface level identity to be who you are, because you now have a deep awareness understanding, not just on a conceptual level, but in an awareness level where you have now directly became conscious of the fact that every possibility exists now within universal intelligence. Universal intelligence includes every possibility of who you want to be. Any version of you that you want to be, that you think exists in the future, actually already exists right now in this present moment. And the more conscious that you become, the more that you realize this. If you really think deeply about this, think about this right now. The only thing that exists is actually this present moment. So if the only thing that exists is this present moment, does that version of yourself that you want to tap into, does that self exist in the future, or does it exist now? So that version of you that is using an affirmation like, I am abundant, or I attract large sums of money into my life easily and effortlessly, or I am confident, or I am so grateful that I manifest $10,000 a month easily and effortlessly. All of these thoughts and the emotions that arise with an interconnection with those thoughts, and that identity of that you can create already exists now. It doesn't exist in the future. And the more that you tap into the selfless part of who you are, you can align with that, and you'll know that at a deeper level, you are even not that self. And when you align yourself with that selfless state of consciousness, you then have this frequency that comes off of you where you also pull people into the light. And they also understand, whether consciously or unconsciously, just by you shining your light, they will know that the self is essentially meaningless. The self is whatever you want it to be. You can create yourself. You can create your reality. You can become anybody you want to be. But ultimately, it's completely meaningless in the sense that you can create the meaning and become who you want to be. Not meaningless in a negative way. If you want to create that meaning, then that's the meaning you create. And that's the reality you step into. But when I say meaningless, I mean this in the most empowering way possible. Because when you realize you are not even a self, when you realize the truth of no self, that you are just pure consciousness, observing that concept of yourself, you are now free. You are now empowered to shift into the reality that you prefer with no resistance. And every action that you take will be in alignment with the evolution of consciousness for this planet at this time. Because if you are still selfish, if you're still running off your ego, you're not going to be contributing to the greater good of this planet. You're going to be reacting to things. You're going to be living in fear. You're going to be living in worry. You're going to be living in anxiety, depression, unconscious reactivity. You're going to be living off of evil. That's what the devil is. It's just pure evil. It's pure evil. It's pure ego. It's pure unconsciousness. It's darkness. And if you are selfishly attached to your ego and you are in alignment with darkness, then what happens is that you are not in alignment with truth. And when you're not in alignment with truth, it's a lose-lose for you and others. So to be selfless is to realize you are not even a self. You are just the pure consciousness that comes before self. And the more that you do this, the more that you allow the evolution of consciousness to happen on this planet, you make it a win-win and you step into the abundance and the new earth that is happening right now. You are making it a win-win for you, not as a self, but you as consciousness, and the you that is also in the other. You make it a win-win for everybody. And sometimes when you align yourself with this truth, it might not make sense to you. Things may happen that may not benefit the self. Maybe it's not going to benefit the self, but it will benefit the selfless part of who you are, which is ultimately more important. Maybe you experience something that is a threat to your ego, is a threat to your survival, is a threat to who you think you are. But it's not a threat to your overall spiritual development and the evolution of consciousness on the planet. And it doesn't mean that you're sacrificing something. It means that you have to go through that experience that may seem negative, but it is for the greater good of your expansion and the consciousness of the planet. So the more that you become conscious, the more that you step into the truth of who you are, you make it a win-win for the planet. And the way that you do this is by learning how to simply become the observer of your thoughts and realize that you are not a self. You are not even a self. Because if you can observe a thought, if you can observe a thought in your mind, that means that thought is not who you are. And that thought that you were unconscious of before you became conscious of it is the self. The ego is nothing more than the unconscious part of who you are. It's the part that you're identified with. You can also call it the unobserved mind, because when you lack awareness of thoughts, when you don't have consciousness of thought form, you become those thoughts. Those thoughts then become your reality, and you unconsciously identify with those thoughts. And if you unconsciously identify with those thoughts, they become who you are, they become a self, and when you're unconsciously attached to your ego, you cannot be in alignment with the truth of who you are as the selfless part of who you are. So the key is to disidentify, detach from the false sense of self. The way that you do this, well, there's a lot of ways to do this. You question who you are at a deeper level. You can do contemplation. You can do meditation. You can do psychedelics. Be careful with that though. I'm not responsible for anything that you do. But certain plant medicines can allow you to connect deeper to that part of yourself. And some people have a negative stigma attached to these plant medicines, but You can use them responsibly, and they will technically allow you to connect to a selfless part of you. I'm not recommending it. I'm not responsible. I'll probably make a video for this specifically in the future. But the point is, to connect to the selfless part of who you are is to detach from the self. There are many ways to do this. You have to go a little bit deeper and find that out for yourself. Meditation is a great way to do it. Self-inquiry is a great way to do it. Question who you think you are. Are you even your thoughts? Is a thought telling you that you're not worthy, you're not confident? Is that really who you are? Is that a fact in the universe, written in the universe? This person is not confident. That's just who he is. That's his self. That's his self-identity. That's just who he is. Is that true? Is that a fact, or is that a conditioned part of you that you've attached to? The more that you detach from that conditioning is when you start to connect to the selfless part of who you are. You are in alignment with truth. You're in alignment with who you actually are. And then you end up creating a win-win reality for you and everyone else, not as the egos, but as the consciousness of who we really are. And you align yourself with that space, you make it a win-win, and we all live in abundance. We take it moment by moment. All you have to do is connect to the joy of the moment, live your life as that spaciousness awareness, not as a person. That's essentially what it means to be selfless. In a couple words right now, you don't live your life as a person, but you live your life as the spacious awareness. You live your life as the observing presence watching the person, not attached to the person. As long as you are identified with the person, with the personhood, with the ego, with the unconsciousness, if you are identified and the identification implies unconsciousness, if you're identified with that, you're not in a selfless state. You're not in alignment with the whole of the universe. You're not in a flow state. You are not in alignment with your highest calling and what you want. And on the contrary, when you align yourself as the spacious consciousness, as the awareness, as truth with a capital T, as love, as light, as awareness, as the observing presence, as consciousness, whatever word you want to use, when you align yourself with that space, everything works out in your life in the way that it's supposed to. So that's all I have for you today. If you like this content, hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell because I post a new video every single day. Hit that like button so more people can see this kind of information and wake up to the truth of who they actually are. I have a free guided meditation that is specifically designed to allow you to connect deeper to the moment, and ironically, that selfless part of who you are. Not so ironic because that's what I do. But that meditation is specifically designed to allow you to connect deeper. So it's completely free. Check it out in the description box of this video and as a comment in this video. That's all I have for you today. Have yourself a great day and see you in the next video.